Pessoal, bom dia. Hoje estamos aqui com a pesquisadora Margrethe Havgar, que vai nos contar um pouco também sobre esse lado da arte na era Viking, né? Um pouco do trabalho dela também. Ela é membro do Museu de História Cultural no caso da Noruega, né? Do Museu da Universidade de Oslo, que é o Kulturhistorisk Museum. E nós vamos aqui começar a passar um pouco para ela. No caso, ela vai nos explicar, né, um pouco dessas informações aqui que vai ser abordada aqui, no caso, na temática. Então, sem mais delongas, eu vou passar aqui a palavra para ela. Ms. Havgar, thank you so much for being here in the channel, for doing this interview. It's a major pleasure receiving you here. I think it was my seventh person that I received from the Kulturhistorisk Museum here in the channel. I love to see the researches in this museum and your projects in the TextRec project and your experience in Viking Age art. Thanks so much for doing this interview. It's amazing receiving you here.
Thank you for having me. It's an immense pleasure to be able to do this. Thanks for reaching out. I'm excited to talk to you and talk about all my nerdness.
Just for our start, your camera is okay now. It's because the camera was having a problem in the beginning, but it's okay now.
It's okay? Okay, good. You just let me know if there's anything I have to change. There's always a technical issue.
Camera, you'll be static again.
Oh no. Let me check my internet connection here. Everything should be good from my end. So I don't know if all my settings are good. So it might just be the internet connection, unfortunately, and I can't really do a lot about that.
Okay, no problem. Let's start the interview. Thanks so much for being here. So for a start, how started your interest for Viking Age, the study of the art in that period, and your participation in the project, the TextRec project? How started your interest for this area?
That's kind of a funny story to me, actually. It started while I was a bachelor student, and the reason I think it's funny personally is because when I started studying archaeology, I was very boisterous about the fact that if there was anything I was going to do, I wasn't going to do Viking Age, because everyone in Scandinavia did the Viking Age, and I'm from Norway and I was studying in Oslo, and I was like, oh, Viking Age, that's not gonna be it. Anything else but the Viking Age. However, then I was very lucky to get a part-time job as a guide at the Viking ship museum here in Oslo, which is currently being rebuilt and remade into the Viking Age Museum. And while I was working there, I just fell in love with everything at that museum, all the ships, and all these beautiful finds. So I would say that it's thanks to the Oseberg burial, the Tuna ship burial, and the Gugsta burial that are all on display at the Viking Age Museum, which is going to open hopefully within the next couple of years, that my interest in the Viking Age kind of started against my wishes a little bit. But I couldn't help it. I just loved it so much. And I became increasingly transfixed by especially the Oseberg ship, looking at the art that was on that ship. And I was so curious about, like, who made this and why did they make it and why did they make it that way? And so the Oseberg ship and the Oseberg burial is what made me really, really fall in love with the Viking Age. And I just couldn't stop asking questions about it. And that's what led me to the fascination with art, art in the Viking Age, how we study art from societies that are so far removed from us. And that's how I got into the project that I'm currently working on, which is reanalyzing the beautiful tapestry fragments from the Oseberg burial.
Oh, it's amazing that you see all these elements that make you feel very closely to the this type of research. Just for saying you, the beginning of the interview was static and only your voice was is possible to listen. Have a problem if only the voice in the beginning was
No,
okay.
that's fine.
Thank you. Now your image and voice was very very nice.
Okay, good.
And so, for us to start our conversation, we know that the Viking Age art was one of the most important elements to comprehend the Viking Age because the art show us many aspects that was the populations in the Viking Age was thinking about the religion, the society, the politics, the economy, and in your opinion, how much we have the comprehension about this art in our totality? Have elements that we didn't know about, or we can say that Viking Age art was a thing that was in your completely totally comprehension nowadays. How do you see this aspect?
I think let me kind of just I have a lot of thoughts about this. So let me just try to talk you through my perspective on this. Is I think there is definitely a lot we know about Viking art. And I think when it comes to how we understand the art, the most interesting thing for me when I really deep dive into interpretations of Viking art is that it almost tells us just as much about ourselves in our modern day as it does about the Viking Age, because there are very clear, you can, at least I think that it's very interesting to see that there have been clear shifts and changes in how we nowadays approach art, in how we study art from past societies, meaning that what we focus on has shifted. So, for example, in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, there was a very big focus on style, in trying to um, get an understanding of what this art was like by dividing it into styles, which I think was really there was some extraordinary work done by a lot of really really talented academics, but it was very focused on what it looked like, how the art has changed over time from way before the Viking Age up until the Middle Ages. And then slowly during the 1900s, there was more and more like a shift into what could this mean, what could it tell us about the how people thought at the time. And that's where I think that we're never really going to we're never really gonna finish understanding Viking Age art, if that makes sense, because the questions we ask, they change all the time, meaning that we look at the art in new ways, so we untangle new threads, and then maybe some research is published by someone who just kind of who asks a completely new question, and that makes us return to the art and different pieces of the art in new ways. So that's a very broad answer, but I think that Viking Age art is a very great way of trying to it gives us a really nice way to at least start asking questions about the technology that they had, the craftsmanship, the talent that they had, what items they decided to decorate. The word decorate, I'm not really a fan of, because that just sounds like they're trying to make it look pretty, but I think that there was probably something more to it than that, that it could look pretty, but also be more. But it's also a great way for us to try to piece together the way that the people of this time thought, and And I think that we know a lot about that, and at the same time, there are a lot of things we don't understand just because our way of thinking today is very different. So we don't really approach the world in the same way. So that's why, we continuously have to ask new questions and try to look at things in a new way.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we have some perspective that about the idea that the Viking Age art has a lot of comprehension that we know a lot of about this art, but we know that we need to understand much more how these people think and the idea that they put in this type of art, because we have many elements. We have gold, we have wood, we have iron, we have many of these elements. And for my next question is about the styles in the Viking Age art. These styles, we can say that they defined all the period of the Viking Age art, or no, we have much more elements than are in another types of how can I say, other objects. And how much you can see that these elements of art are very connected to these styles. We have these styles, but we have others that are different and are not classified in the Hinderik, Urnis, Osberg.
I see. Okay. So, please correct me if I'm not answering your question clearly. But did you mean kind of are the styles that we work with, do they include all types of art, or are there other things that don't fall into those categories? Was that what you meant?
Yes.
So I would say that an important thing to know and be aware of when we operate with the styles is that what we call the styles today they can be very good tools for us to start understanding it, but it's important to be aware of the fact that the styles are categories that we have made. So we don't know whether people actually thought of the art and the way that it looked in styles, because essentially what the styles do is that they categorize the art into differences based on there are changes happening in the art, and the way that the styles then works, that they kind of categorize the art based on what they look like to map out the changes that happen slowly and surely, and sometimes very quickly within the art. But I would say that it also depends a little bit about on who you talk to, because not everyone, myself included, we don't necessarily use the styles as hard lines. They're not necessarily the only thing that determines something, but they can be a good way of comparing stuff. If you find a sword that looks like a particular style, it's then easy to look up other artifacts that might not even be swords with the same kind of style from our perspective today. So it's a great way to start comparing things. But it's not really a hard line in my book. So it's not that, the Vikings made something one way and they were like, we're going to stop doing it this way, and then they started doing it a different way. It's like this gradual, slow change over time. Or quick change, depending on what we're talking about. But there is definitely stuff that falls outside of the style categories, first of all. To bring up one example, just the style name Oseberg style in and of itself, even though it's still used today, I personally am not a very big fan of that style category, just because of the fact that it gets its name from the Oseberg burial that I mentioned earlier. However, all of the things in the Oseberg burial belong to different styles if you look at them closely. So it seems like in this particular burial, they have gathered things from probably different time periods, maybe things that were new, things that were, sacrificed, or things that have been inherited from earlier generations, and they all ended up in the same burial for the same reason. And at the same time, there are also actual physical things that can't really be put into those style categories. And one example of that is the tapestry pieces that I'm working on specifically. And the reason why they can't be put into those styles is because the type of art that they show is completely different than the art that we're talking about when we're talking about the styles. So the styles usually include everything that we call animal art. And what we mean by that is kind of ribbon-like. It looks like knotwork, but it is knotwork to a certain extent, but it's not really knots because the knots are creatures. And that is a very distinct form of art that started way before the Viking Age, and also different forms of it occurs in various places in Europe, not just Scandinavia during the Viking Age. But the tapestry pieces don't display that sort of knotwork. It's more like, I hesitate to call it a cartoon, but it's a little bit more like if you would look at rock art or the Bayeux tapestry. The way that the art is formed is much more storyboarded in a way, even though it's still difficult to understand exactly what's going on. So they fall outside of those style categories. So the styles are great up until a certain point.
Yeah, we have a lot of problems, I think, in this classification because sometimes they say they have 6 styles, 7 styles, and the number of styles change every time. And we have the Rolling Stones styles to classify. And how we can define the classification to these styles. In your opinion, we have how much styles, or it doesn't matter. We need to see much more how these arts are made, or how you see this perspective of to classify this type of art.
Well, I would say that it might sound like I'm kind of not super, that I think that maybe we shouldn't use styles, but I actually don't think that. I think that it because there's been so much great research done on this. I think that the styles are very, very good categories for us to have, because the amount of artifacts and the varied amount of artifacts that we're talking about is so huge, and it spans a lot of countries and it spans a lot of centuries. So now I'm including stuff both before and after the Viking Age in what I'm saying. So I think that we should keep the styles, but the way that we make the styles work for us is to treat them as tools and not as rules, if that makes sense. So if a certain type of artifact, let's say a walking stick or something of that kind, even though there aren't really that many walking sticks that I know from the Viking Age, but let's say we found a walking stick, and the art on it is similar to a certain type of style, but maybe not exactly the same. The style that it is most similar to is still a good tool to use in order to compare it to other artifacts and try to figure out what we're dealing with. So I think as long as we use the styles as something that inspires us and something that can help us and to create patterns of thought, patterns of interpretation, I think the styles are great. I think we should absolutely keep using them as long as we're aware of the fact that they're categories that we have made for research. So we shouldn't discard things just because they don't agree with the styles, but rather the other way around, that we should use the style categories carefully in order to give ourselves a frame of reference. I think the styles are great as a frame of reference, essentially.
Oh, that's very interesting to saw of this point of view, because I have uh, this topic in my channel about Viking Age art, and we analyze the styles, we see the one by one, but it's the first time that I saw that we have this side of the Viking Age art, because sometimes we only thinking for the classified one by one, and we have much more to say about this art, and not only for the classification of the styles. And this is fantastic to see this point. And the using of materials for conduct this type of art, as I told, is diversified, and we have, as I said, gold, metallic elements, the wood elements, and in your vision, how the concept of using these materials was used to transmit a lot of what they think in that time. We have much more elements in wood or gold. What specifically they have preference for something material to use to conduct this art? How do you see this aspect?
Well, there are two answers to that question. And the first answer is not connected to the second answer.
Mhm.
The first answer is that the type of material that we by far have the most of with art is things of metal, not necessarily gold, but various types of metal. So for example, I mean, we have so much horse equipment and different types of weaponry. We have jewelry. But the reason that does not mean that metal was the most preferred material. It could be, but we know that the reason we have much more artifacts made by metal that shows art is because wood rots. So the amount of metal versus wood is skewed because as an inorganic material that even though metal rusts, it is preserved longer, way longer than organic materials like textiles and wood. So we know for a fact that they displayed art on metal because we have so much of it. But exactly what material was preferred is really hard to say because we can't really say for certain based on what's preserved to today, especially here in Norway. The soil is a certain type of acidic a lot of the places, which means that things would rot way quicker. There are certain places in Denmark and Sweden where things are preserved for longer because the oil isn't as acidic. But it does still rot when stuff is buried. So it's kind of hard to say exactly what material would be their preferred one. And I would hazard a guess that it would entirely depend on exactly where we are during the Viking Age and when we are. And what the thought was behind displaying this art on whatever we're talking about. If we're talking about, a wagon, or we're talking about jewelry, or we're talking about household items. So long story short, to answer your second question, we don't really know. I think that, if you ask different researchers, you will get different answers. But from my perspective, it's almost impossible to say what their preferred material was just because we don't have enough of the different groups to be able to say for sure. And the reason we don't have enough to say for sure is because there are types of material that we just don't find because it's gone by the time we excavate it.
Oh, that's fantastic. So to decide, because we have a lot of using of metallic elements, and they are with many adorns and many aspects of the using that they forge swords that have a lot of structures that are beautiful for people that are in the, how can I say, in the high levels of the societies in the Viking Age. And one of the most interesting thing is about, as you said, the jewelry, the using of elements that are part of men's and women's in that society. And sometimes I think in children's that they probably use some of these elements. And one of the most interesting thing, what we say about that, the use of jewelries of adorns of this type of access of this art is only limited to the biggest high society of the Viking Age, or we can saw people that are not explicitly from this type in the society are part of these elements they use. It's possible to find, or it's find some grave that was a person that not exactly from high society using this type of jewelry or elements.
Oh, that's such a great question, because that's something I think that we can forget to talk about sometimes, because it's also important to remember that, the richest people with the most ostentatious burials, meaning the most, rich, like Tutankhamun type burials, which, by the way, the Oseberg burial that I've mentioned several times is that type of burial. You can absolutely not use it to be, a representative for all of Viking Age, because that was just the creme de la creme, the top tier, peak society. Like, the amount of richness and the quality of stuff is just unbelievably extra. But when it comes to whether this type of art would be accessible to people of various stages of society, I would say probably yes. I think, first of all, it would be visible, because a lot of the things that we found them on, like brooches and weaponry and sleds, wagons, it indicates that this wasn't a type of visual thing that was hidden. Rather, the opposite. You would see it. And there are also markets that are found from the Viking Age with where we've found I'm trying to think of the phrase here. We found technical workshops, like, for example, smithies and stuff like that, with the, gosh darn, I've forgotten the word, molds for making especially brooches. And specific types of molds have indicated that they've been used several times, meaning that it's not the same as mass producing today, but meaning that you could create the same type of jewelry more than once. And that indicates that if you could make the same type of jewelry more than once, that would probably not be as expensive as something that was custom made. And from that, we can assume that people who weren't necessarily the top of the society would have access also to brooches with this type of art. But maybe their brooches would be the same as someone who, lived 2 farms away from them. While the absolute top people of society would maybe have custom made items.
Oh, it's a lot of interesting. So this we have the possibility of people have this access, this because of the large production sometimes of a specific element or brooches or pendant. And this is interesting to see that it's not common, but it have a possibility for people of
Well, I would
not.
say it's neither common nor uncommon. So it's like it's in that space between super common and super unusual. It's just kind of like it's there. It's not really, yeah.
Oh, okay. It's just so that the idea. And one of the most interesting things that we have is the idea of colors in the Viking Age. And when we have colors, we have art too. And what we can say about the idea of runestones, colors in textiles products. How do you say Viking Age was colorful,
Yes.
or have a side that was many black or gray like the Viking series?
Mm,
What we can say about these two sides of the same coin? What do you
yeah.
say?
I think that's such a wonderful question, because that is something I'm a big nerd, and I love watching movies and TV shows. But that's something that I find so fascinating with for example, shows like, The Last Kingdom or Vikings, or also shows about, medieval times, and everything is always so monochrome and brown. And what I find fascinating about that is that was probably not the case at all by all indicators. That being said, it's hard to find it's hard to find stuff that looks colorful now, because dye stuff, so the things that you use to color fabrics or, paint, is also something that flakes away or fades over time. So to us, it might not seem as colorful as it was. But although we should always take, sagas and the mythology with a certain, we should approach them critically and take them with a certain grain of salt, not because they're necessarily incorrect, but just because things might have changed between the time when they were spoken and by the time way after the Viking Age when they were actually written down. The mention of color in a variety of written sources that claims to be from the Viking Age is so massive that it's hard for me to picture a Viking Age that didn't have color. Because historically also, color is something that you use to flavor life. You can see that today too. Like, people have different styles, they have different preferences, and fashions and designs change, but there's always some color somewhere. And there are every indication that we're talking at least, dye stuffs that I know of, colors that I know would have been used, is red, yellow, black paint, and also a certain type of dark blue that you would get from the plant woad. So, those are all pretty strong colors. And I think that, your access to certain types of colors would probably maybe depend on your status, just because there are certain dye stuffs that are more difficult to produce and would maybe have to be imported. But there are other dye stuffs that you can find around in nature. People still, make colored yarn from stuff that they find out in the forest. You can use yellow onion to dye stuff. So I think it was colorful. I think it was absolutely colorful. 100%. Way more that we're used to seeing it, I would say. So while I think the Viking show and the Last Kingdom show does a lot of really great stuff, I would give them a little bit of like, why isn't there more color here? Like, why wouldn't like a king have like a blue cloak? Because we know that blue was expensive. Blue was an expensive color to make, and it took a long time. So having something that was blue would be an indicator that, oh wow, this is a person who has means.
It's fun because now doing some clothes that people want to do in a reenact of Viking Age, it's much easy that compared to that period. I have example a woman clothes that have the blue and orange. That was very expensive colors in that time, but nowadays we can do reenacts that possibly this we have this idea to how is used this type of clothes.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's something that I actually want to say too, that I think a lot of reenactment groups does that really well. Maybe the way that, reenactment groups use color today is different than it would have been used in the Viking Age, but there is so much color, and that's what I love. Because that, I think it gives more of kind of an interesting look into what the past could have been like. So there are maybe types of colors, like, I'm just kind of randomly suggesting colors here now, that I might be wrong about this, but I imagine that maybe, for example, turquoise or aquamarine might be a color that we're used to seeing today, that they might have seen, that they would see in nature and from the sea, but I don't know if they would be able to recreate that color. But other colors, 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. Did you watch the Northman movie? What do you think they use of the palette of colors?
I've
in the
seen clips and I've seen images, and I have so many friends and colleagues who have told me repeatedly to watch that movie, and I just keep forgetting. But I've heard that it's really good. But the little that I've seen of it, again, I have not seen the whole movie, but the little that I've seen of it seems to be more colorful than I'm used to seeing the Viking Age. So I'm going to leave it at that. So I don't want to say anything else about the quality, given that I haven't seen the movie, but it seems more colorful than other Viking adaptations that I've seen. So I'm going to give it points for that.
Oh, okay. It's fantastic so that we have these multiple aspects of the using of colors. And one of the most interesting elements in all this, I think it was about the runestones. Runestones have colors, or no, they only have sometimes these red lines, or we don't have idea if they have are painted or no inside of the figures. How the search is talking about these aspects, because sometimes we have recreations of some moonstones that they put colors to say, oh, this probably have this type of color. Example.
You
What
know
do you
what?
can see?
I am actually, let me Google real quick. Because that's something I'm not actually sure of. Um,
Search
I will,
about
okay,
Harold Bluetooth runestones. He made one of for his mother and one of his
I will,
father.
okay, I'm gonna, because I just had to double check something. Because what I will say is the way that we see runestones today, if they are painted, are probably not their original colors. There are, I do not know a lot about this, but there are indicators that would seem to suggest that some, if not all of them, could absolutely have been painted to make them more visible. But given the fact that most runestones were left out in nature where they were supposed to be, and out in the weather, that paint would probably, I assume, have flaked away way over time. So today, as far as I know, most of them are repainted with carefully chosen dyes to make it visible to us. I might be wrong about that in some cases, but I know that is also what we do with rock art from the Stone Age and the Bronze Age, and that's just simply to make it visible to our eyes. Because if not, we would have to change light and shadows, and that's also really fun. But as far as I know, there seem absolutely to be indicators that runestones could have and would have been painted. But the paint that we see today is probably not original in most cases.
Oh, that's interesting. So when they
But
use
again, I just don't look
ah
everything up. Always double check.
okay, no problem. So we have this two sided probably they use for the colors or for represent what probably was if the runestones have a color, and this type of use of the red lines to see more what is in the script. I think I remember that have some persons or research that did not like too much of this using of the red and color, because they sometimes discounters the use of the runes, so because they don't have colors, and when now you put some red ink, that's not part of the runestones, and they sometimes have the conflict of use or not use these colors.
Absolutely. That's the same issue with a lot of rock art too, because it's there is I don't think there's a right question to any of this. But there's that tension between making it visible so that we can see it today versus letting it be what it was when we found it. And also there's also the issue that, there are some paints, I don't know if this has occurred with runestones, but I know it has occurred with rock art here in Norway, that unfortunately some paints that have been used turned out to actually harm the art, which was discovered years later. And then it's like, but then how do you remove that without, harming the runestone or the rock art? And it also changes what it would look like visually. And if it was originally painted, how do we know that we use the right colors? Maybe there were specific colors that were used to indicate certain things for very specific reasons. And now I'm talking about runestones specifically. And that's an ongoing debate. And I think it's a really good and healthy discussion to have that debate.
It's interesting. So that because we have this, as I said, we have the ideas of if these are colorful or what is not colorful in the Viking Age, and we have many elements. If woods are colorful or no or not, I saw a research that say, oh, sometimes that probably some elements in wood or have color or not don't have color, and this is a thing that I think we need more research to
Absolutely.
provide what is colorful or not colorful in the Viking Age. Is the
Mhm.
great idea about what is or not is. And for the part of textile part, that was one of the most that I love to say. How what is possible for doing this? What the process to creating the colors and to have the costume and producing the images. What do your research about know about this? Have to talk about this element in the Viking Age, the importance of to the textile production.
Well, what I want to say is that something that I've noticed working on my PhD project, and kind of getting into the textile research world when it comes to ancient textiles and very old archaeological textiles, is that I think it's interesting how we still don't pay as much attention to textiles as we should. Now, I know that I mentioned earlier that we don't find as much of it, and maybe that is a reason, because we don't have as much of it. Maybe people just don't pay attention, but we still have some. So I still find it really, really interesting that both inside of academia and outside of academia, there isn't as much attention paid to textiles as there should be. And the reason why I think there should be more attention paid to textiles is because, for the simple reason, I'm just warning you and the audience that's going to be listening to this, I am about to make a very big generalization. So please don't take this personally. But I think that the way that we deal with textiles today is so casual and it's so on hand. And I mean, of course, it depends on, your access to things, but we have way more access to textiles, clothes, bed clothes, any other thing that you would need textiles for today without us necessarily even having to think about it. But in the Viking Age, and also many other ages, but especially the Viking Age, when we're talking about an age that was so based on seafaring, especially, textiles is such a fundamental part of how you make society work. You need it for almost everything. You need it, first of all, for clothes. And clothes wear and tear. So you're going to need constantly new clothes for different people. And back to the point of this being, an age with a lot of seafaring, the amount of textiles needed for ships, especially ships with sails, is immense. So, first of all, what I think is really important to highlight is that textile production was largely a huge part of Viking Age life regardless of who you were in society. One thing was having your own clothes. We don't really know how many sets of clothes were common for a random normal person to have, just because we don't really have it. But you would need sails. The amount of fabric that you need for a sail is frankly mind-boggling. And you have this whole chain of events to even get a single piece of thread. You have to, first of all, you either have to produce the plant if you're making a plant-based fabric or textile like linen, or if you're using wool, you need to, have sheep. You need to have sheep with the right type of wool, because that's something also we don't really think about today. But there are certain types of wool that work particularly well for very different uses. So not only do you need wool for just wool in general, you maybe need certain types of wool for the thing that you are doing. So you need to either farm the plant, or you need to raise the wool, then you need to harvest the plant, or you need to shear the sheep, then you need to, treat the wool or the plant in a way that would let you extract the fibers, and then you would need to spin every single piece of thread to the length and the thickness that you would need to do the particular task that you need to do. And then you would need to dye it if it was going to have a color. And then you could start perhaps weaving it, unless there were other also additional things. And I've spoken here as if there's one person doing this, but probably there were multiple, if not tens of people involved in every single step of the process. So I think that there's probably a large part of Viking Age life that is invisible to us today, because we can't see that whole production chain in the archaeological material. We can see glimpses of it, but we can't see the whole thing. But I think it was probably a huge part of Viking Age life. You would probably, you'd probably be able to do the whole chain of events yourself at a farm if you had sheep, or farmed flax to make linen. But it would still take a massive amount of time. Also, so you both have the time aspect and the amount of people involved. So, textiles, long story short, big deal. Big deal.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's interesting that you say about this that reference the textile production, because it's hard to see people that work with this part of knowledge, textiles production. We saw much more jewelry or armory or any other aspects in the Viking Age, but textile production is, as you say, is really difficult to find people that will work with that. I don't know if it's much more complex or we don't have a lot of this, but I think it was a very interesting, because when you have a piece of a tapestry, you have a history in there. We saw elements, pre-Christians and Christians elements sometimes in these tapestries. It's not totally conservative, but is very, you can saw very elements that are part of that society.
It's the same when you're talking about, metal artifacts or wood artifacts. Just the material itself can help you say something about where was the material from, like where did they get it from, and then someone had to make it, someone had to shape it, someone had to know how to do it. So just one single piece in and of itself could potentially hold so many answers to different parts of Viking Age life. And what I want to say is also that one thing is that we don't see a lot of it in the archaeological material. And I want to be, careful not to be unjust here to past excavations, but I will also say that there is a definite unfortunate aspect of sexism when it comes to this particular type of thing, when it comes to textile research. Somewhat to a certain degree still, but mostly in what we have left over from research and archaeological excavations that were done in the mid-late 1800s and early 1900s. Because at that time, especially here in Scandinavia, working with textiles was something that was seen as a woman's job. And implicitly, because it was a woman's job, it wasn't as interesting as anything else. So we can tell from a lot of the archaeological documentation that we have from early excavations that they didn't really look for it either. So the question is also, is this hard to find? And the answer to this might absolutely be yes. And I think it is yes to a large extent. But also, things might also have been overlooked because they weren't really interested in it. So they didn't really bother. So things might have fallen through the cracks. And I also think that's, an important fact to acknowledge that, we are also working with sometimes a lot of material that has been excavated like literally 100 years ago. And then we also have to reckon with the fact that people have always been people. And sometimes we make mistakes, and the society we live in also dictates the way that we work with stuff. And, that's kind of, that's part of it too. That because textile work wasn't looked at as cool as, metalworking, we haven't really looked for traces of textile production until fairly recently. Textile production research has really only taken off, I would say, to a large extent in the last 30 years, maybe at most. But there are now a couple of, not more than a couple, but a couple especially amazing researchers who have just really expanded our knowledge on this. One being, I want to name drop someone, is Eva Andersson Strand at the University of Copenhagen. She has done an insane amount of research into textile technology and textile production in the Iron Age broadly, but also particularly the Viking Age, since the 90s. And her research is absolutely fundamental for our understanding of the way the textile production worked in the Viking Age.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, we have a lot of names of principally women that are in...
Weird! It's just women who research textiles mostly. It's like there's a tradition here that we're still battling with.
Yeah, it's amazing. So, and many of them sometimes know to reproduce and these styles. It's fantastic. So that, because it's like you see that this tradition was conquer many persons to be invited to knowledge about the tapestries or about the textile production, and this is fantastic. So that this is a return of this tradition nowadays. Yes. This is amazing.
I love it.
I love this part too. I think the textiles production is one of my favorites to analyze and comprehend by Canadian art. Ms. Havgar, do you like to present your pictures here to show us?
Yeah, I could show you some stuff because we've talked a lot about, textile production and the way that Viking art worked. But my project specifically is on the art of the tapestries from the Oseberg burials. So I thought that I could show you a bit about what that means. So essentially, the art on these tapestries is very different from most of the art, I would say, that we see from the Viking Age. But at the same time, because the textiles are so old, and because it is textile, like we talked about earlier, it decomposes a lot differently, and it's easier to break. They're now currently in a lot of bits and pieces, specifically, that are just sometimes impossible to piece back together. And one of the results of that is that it's a bit difficult to see exactly what we're looking at. So part of my research project has been to take account of, oh, excuse me, sorry, there was an alarm here going off. So part of my research project has been to use pictures, really high quality pictures that were taken as part of a research project, TextRec, that I'm a part of, to try to use digital tools to look at the tapestry pieces anew, to see if I could see new things. Now, many of these textile pieces have been illustrated before, but I thought that it would be cool to see if using tools that I have access to now, which, you know, most of these tapestry pieces were drawn in, you know, between 1916 and 1950, and they didn't have access to a computer. They had to sit next to them and, you know, draw them by hand, while I have access to other stuff. So I've tried to kind of play my way through it. But before I start, I also just want to mention something, and that is, when I talk about tapestry pieces, when it comes to textile research specifically, tapestry is a technical term. So the way that it's used in English today and just the vernacular is often to describe something that's been hung on a wall. But their research has been done by this brilliant researcher at the museum that I work at, Margrethe, who has looked at the burial chamber of the Oseberg burial where these pieces were found, and she has found absolutely no indicators that they were hung on walls. So tapestry here means a type of textile that was woven in a specific way to display pictures. It doesn't mean hung on a wall, if that makes sense. Okay, so I thought that I would show you, let me find them first, a couple of pictures to illustrate exactly what I do. So, let's see here, am I allowed to share my screen? There we go.
Whoa.
Yes, so this is something that my hang on, I think I presented it weirdly. Stop sharing. Sorry, I'm used to using Zoom, which is why I got a bit confused about how it works on Google Meets. There we go. So the tapestry pieces can look like this or this. Did the picture change?
Yeah.
Okay, good, because I can't see myself. Great. From this, but they can also look something like this or this.
Oh.
Yep. Or this.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so they can be, you know, there are very different different results that you get from the tapestry piece you're looking at. So what I've done essentially is that I've used a picture like this, and then I have colored the way you would do in a coloring book, where I can see distinct differences. And that usually gives me something along the lines of this. Now, since we've talked about colors earlier, I also want to specify that my use of green and kind of salmon red here is not an indicator of actual colors from the Viking Age. I have just used these colors to show contrast to myself when I work. So this tapestry wouldn't have been in these colors. And that usually results in me getting a sketch like this.
Oh.
Yes. So here you can see, you know, a bunch of people walking. There are horses, there are wagons. Some people are carrying things, other people aren't carrying things. There are birds. There are what looks like maybe spears. There's a lot of variety in the clothing, but it's also very similar. Yeah, so there's a lot happening here.
It's
And
like a procession. We can say
yeah,
that's.
absolutely. It's this particular tapestry piece is actually also called the procession. It's like that's a nickname that we use for it today.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's I didn't know it. I only told.
So it's very good. Good job.
Oh,
And
yes.
I thought that I would maybe because it might, seem crazy to go from this to this, but I would also like to say that this is one of the easier ones because this one, even before I've done anything, you can kind of see that something is going on here. But I don't just go straight from this to this. So I brought some examples, like this one, for example. It's maybe a bit harder to tell exactly what's going on. So what I do essentially is that I use this software called Adobe Fresco. I don't know if this is the best software to do this in, but that's the one that I had access to. So I just kind of played around with it, and I, after a while, found out that I could change what the software reads as different colors. I could change the color scale of them. And in most cases, that would give me differences. So here I've changed the scale of what the program reads as red or yellow, and that suddenly gives me a lot more to work with. So the way that I color is that based on these changes, I start to color what to me looks like differences. Now, it's not just based on color too, because as I've worked more and more with textiles, I start to recognize when things are standing out from the background. So in some cases, I can tell that, oh, this thread is on top of another thread. So that is probably an indicator of some type of motif. And that's how I kind of get to the coloring of all of it. So now I'm coloring one layer, everything that to me appears as one color, and then I color in a different color to change or to kind of see the contrast more clearly. And as you can see from the little video, I switch between the two quite regularly. And yeah, and that after I've done all of that, I then use those colors. Kind of, I fade them away a little bit, but then I use those as the kind of the way that I outline what I see. But that doesn't necessarily always give me perfect results. In most cases, I would not say that it gives me perfect results at all, but that I end up hopefully with something looking like this.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Amazing. Of course, it's amazing. It's fantastic, the draws.
Yeah. So here you go. Like, this is kind of what a finished illustration would look like. And this, I assume that you've, seen your fair share of animal art, like on weapons or jewelry. And to me, at least, this is very different from animal art.
Oh, fantastic.
But at the same time, it was created by the same, people who lived with animal art. So there are two different, I wouldn't call them styles since we've talked so much about styles, but there are at least two different ways of visually creating art that exists in the Viking Age. Probably many more too.
Oh, amazing! Know all of this. It's fantastic. Miss Havgar, I would like to thank you so much for presenting all of this to me. It's fantastic. I have no idea how your work was brilliant, and how these ideas that you use, the illustrations, the video, and thank you so much for being here doing this interview. I was very, very enchanted to all that I see, and
You're so
how you
welcome.
use the illustrations, the colors. It's amazing. Thank you so much for doing this interview.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. So let me know if you want to have another interview sometimes, and I'll happily attend. This was great. Thank you for all of your interesting questions too. This was great.
Oh, thank you. I will just stop the recording now.